Well, as a champion of free trade, New Zealand must be sure of its facts before taking any action to impose punitive duties on imported potato products, said to have been dumped on the local New Zealand market because of a glut in Europe caused by COVID-19 lockdowns, affecting their food service industry. Potatoes New Zealand says the imports, which are cheap, not just because of the glut, but also because of the unlevel playing field. Of course, that is their European subsidies to their farmers, could devastate the growing and processing sector here and lead to job losses. So the stakes are very high. We continue to follow this story because it is important. CEO for Potato New Zealand, Chris Claridge, joins us now in studio. And of course, I would love your questions at home to him as well, because I know that you love when we get Chris on the show. So thank you so much for joining us tonight in studio, Chris. Update from last time.
Good evening, Sarah. It's great to be here with you and Joel in your studio. So a quick update of what's happened is we identified in May that there was significant risk posed to us by Europeans dumping into the New Zealand domestic market, as well into our offshore export markets. And we approached the government and had a series of conversations with officials, and we have investigated further and found direct evidence of a significant rise in exports from Holland and Belgium to New Zealand, which constitute a threat, and we have an ability using domestic legislation to seek the government to intervene and place duties at the border. As well, we're also seeing price cutting as well from those exports. So we have the evidence, we've taken it to MB, and we've sought them to start an investigation.
Okay, things move slow in any ministry, let alone when it comes to this. Why not go straight to the World Trade Organization?
Well, so there's two basic paths that we can go down. One is using the Trade Safeguards Measures Act, and the other one is the Dumping and Countervailing Duties Act, both of which pieces of legislation we have at our disposal. But the WTO route, or the Temporary Safeguards Measures Act, is quite a blunt instrument, and also there's a high threshold to get over in that respect. And let me make this clear that we're not against free trade. We absolutely are proponents of free trade, but free trade doesn't mean no rules. And domestic legislation here in New Zealand is in line with international trade agreements, that it technically protects our industry from the predatory activities of agents offshore. And that's exactly what we're seeing here, where we're being targeted. So where Europe's overall exports each month is down by 50%, their exports to New Zealand have gone up by 50%. So they're actively targeting not only New Zealand, but also Australia and Southeast Asia, because the impacts of COVID-19 are not as pronounced in this area in New Zealand. And so therefore, you could say that they were targeting us. Now, they produce and export 400,000 tonnes per annum. Our total annual production is around about 150,000 tonnes. So in 2 weeks of their exports can wipe out our entire industry. That gives you an idea of the scale that we're facing. Now, we are an exporting industry. We export to 400 countries. We export 75,000 tonnes of frozen fries a year ourselves, predominantly into Australia and to around the Pacific Islands and up into Southeast Asia, worth $100 million a year in export receipts. So we are used to operating in the export markets. We know what is a fair price. We know what's normal, and the situation we're facing is totally abnormal.
Are you able to break it down for us in regards to the spud for non-level playing field of the subsidies these European farmers get to produce and what they are flooding the market with here versus New Zealand's higher input farming and what we need to sell that for effectively?
Yes. So let's unpack that. Europe, as I'm sure your listeners are well aware, has common agricultural practice. They have subsidies that they subsidise their farmers, and they have agreements that bind them in how they operate. what happened was at the end of March, effectively, they were let off the leash. There was new rules published that allowed them to, each country to, in a sense, intervene even more than what they normally do. And the Dutch responded by setting up a $90 million fund to fund growers directly and to fund the potato, to try and dispose of the potato mountain they had. And they were directed to, if they received monies for those potatoes, to give them to a food bank or direct them to green energy or to stock feed. Now, I would argue that that's relatively difficult to police, and we've got direct evidence that, in effect, that subsidised product ended up being processed.
So they could effectively get more by processing it and exporting it than they would taking the... Oh, goodness.
Yes. So
you'd like to be a potato farmer in the Netherlands with those options.
Yeah, well, to be fair to them, it is a difficult situation they've got, and we get it. They've got excess supply in their market because of demand interruptions, but that doesn't mean that you then dump it on another country. You don't export your problem, you deal with it, and you don't break international trade rules, which in effect is what is happening here.
Okay, so what sort of detrimental effect is happening on our potato growers and their seasons? How long have we got before this actually wipes out an industry?
Well, so how the industry is structured is around about 50% of all potatoes planted goes into chip manufacture. So how the processes work, and we have 5 processors in New Zealand, they issue contracts to growers. And those contracts, in a sense, underpin the agribusiness operations. Now, what happens is if the processors aren't confident they can, compete, and in this case they're facing competitors who are prepared to undercut by 20 to 40% in the marketplace, what they then do is reduce their contracts, or in some cases may not issue contracts. So you get a diminishing confidence in the industry, and people exit the industry, and over time it slowly spirals down. But we think in this case that this could happen quite quickly. So in a sense that processors could argue force majeure and say, look, we can't accept your potatoes anymore. Look, we're out of business here. And that is the sort of ultimate risk that we're facing, and that then we lose 5 processors, we lose 500 jobs, we lose 3,000 people in the associated industry. But more importantly, we lose a primary productive industry that ensures domestic food security and is an export base and is a potential for export. And we had an aggressive export growth because we can produce fries competitively here. We're renowned in terms of our productive ability. We compete very well on the world market. We're seeing double-digit growth into Asia. All of these things were lined up. And the Europeans, don't get me wrong, they know exactly what they're doing here because we compete against them. And we compete against them into the Australian market and into Southeast Asia. So it would be very useful if we went away.
So why do you believe that our government isn't taking action? Is there too much threat to free trade agreements, and especially with a lot of negotiations in Europe across the board going on right now? Is that what's going on?
Well, first thing, again, to reiterate, is that we're not against free trade, but we want a level playing field. Now, the Europeans could argue, and it is a very much a big stretch here, that somehow we impact on their ability, to export by putting up temporary measures at the border. But I think that is a stretch, and they're not technically allowed to engage in retaliatory actions, and that would be looked very unfavourably under WTO agreements. Look, this is quite normal as well. There are constantly tariff and anti-dumping actions taken. It's not been done by an industry before. Now, there's the interesting point is growers are not taking the action. Industry is taking the action on behalf of the processors. So any processor could undertake an application to MB, and they do constantly for other products. It's just that our industry has got organised. The growers asked us for support and help. The industry asked us for support and help, and we've reacted by collectively going in and saying to the government, there's an issue here, you need to solve it, this is critical, you need to move quickly.
We have a member of the Primary Production Select Committee that will be coming up shortly. What is your strong message to them as opposed to dealing with MB that I know are currently considering your application? Well,
I don't think the action of the potato industry at all interferes or in any way impacts on international free trade negotiations. I mean, it is a stretch. And whilst we understand that people might not like these discussions being had, they have to be had and they can be had, and the domestic legislation exists for us to have them. So to say to us, no, potato growers and potato processors, you can't address your issue because we've got the potential of a deal over here, is absolutely not fair, because we have these rules. We can ask for assistance, and we have. It doesn't impact on free trade agreements, doesn't impact on free trade negotiations. There is not bad optics around this. It is very simple. This is a domestic issue. We can address it.
Lastly, as the CEO of one of our major industry bodies, Fit for a Better World's accelerated roadmap was released last week. Are you throwing your weight behind it for your growers to support this vision?
We think this is a brilliant vision. I attended the launch on Tuesday, and I must say I'm really keen on the fact that MPIs got behind the primary sector and the Prime Minister's got behind the primary sector. And look, we can achieve this level of growth, and it's an aggressive target that's been set, some 44 billion in the next 10 years. And potatoes want to be part of that. And we think we can really contribute to that if we're given a short-term assistance to get us through the other side of this temporary glitch, then we're ready and keen to support those targets.
Oh, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to join us in studio. All these in-studio guests, I'm feeling very, very privileged. Chris, before you sneak off, we're talking about beautiful hot islands that we could be at right now. It's a bit frosty in Christchurch for you. Where would you jump on a plane to?
Well, as a North Islander, I've found it as a surprise to come to the what was it today here in Lincoln?
-3 this morning.
-3 here this morning. But I did grow up in Christchurch, so I'm well used to it.
Yes.
I'm actually looking at Chatham Islands.
Hey.
I'm keen to go to the Chatham Islands. I think the Chatham Islands is really a hot tourist destination, I think, to go out there and celebrate our unique offshore subantarctic islands.
I think it could be a really great foodie destination. It is a great producer of many different things of food, but to pull those things together, tourism, hospitality, unique Chatham Islands hospitality too, and you can jump on a plane from Kapiti Coast.
Yes, apparently, well, because Air New Zealand no longer fly to and from Paraparaumu Airport, Chatham Air took over that link, and I've discovered I can fly to Chatham Islands from Kapiti, which I'm really keen to undertake.
There we go. If Chris Claridge goes missing, we know where he is to be found.
This is Sarah's Country.